February 22nd, 1950, the University of Miami opened the doors to the Woese Museum, the first public arts institution in Miami. Over the past 50 years, the museum has gone through a number of expansions to hold over 7,000 objects in its permanent collection. Brian Dursum, the museum director, will take us on a tour of the museum's various collections.
In the original buildings, which include the 1950 edition, the 1953, 56, and 61 editions, we have housed in those areas really the permanent collection, which includes, and it takes you through a panoramic view of world history, world art history. It takes you through the Greco-Roman world. It takes you into Renaissance and Baroque, which is the gallery we're currently standing in. It takes you into 18th through early 20th century, which is a gallery that we rotate once a year. Then through African, Asian, pre-Columbian, Native American. And then if you go into the new wings, you get into 20th century American, which is part of the permanent collection, as well as two galleries which we use for traveling exhibitions which will rotate every 6 to 8 weeks. Well, the Renaissance collection was actually a gift to the nation in the 1950s. It was made as a national distribution by the Kress family, a Kress Family Foundation, out of the National Gallery in Washington, D.C. The Lowe got 41 paintings and sculpture in 1954. The actual transfer of the gift didn't occur until 1961 when this gallery was built to house it. I have added actually works, another 19 works that were donated to the museum by other contributors in the Miami area to that collection, and it's a wonderful collection, a great resource of Italian Renaissance and Baroque painting. It also includes a small collection of Northern European, Northern Renaissance material from roughly the same period. Well, the Renaissance, as you're probably aware, is really, literally means rebirth, and it really was a rebirth of going back to classical roots and classical, Greco-Roman antiquities and roots, discovering that whole area again. It's found in many of the paintings. The paintings before tended to be rather flat to a certain extent in the medieval period. In the Renaissance, you begin to get into the whole issue of color, light, perspective, the whole notion of trying to create out of a two-dimensional work some three-dimensional movement to the work that didn't really exist before. In the portrait collection, we really have highlighted paintings that sort of follow after this, that come into the late Baroque and beyond that. This the 18th century, 18th, 19th, and early 20th century. And of course, if you look at the portraits, they change a great deal. In the Renaissance, there is still a certain amount of religious use for the painting. For example, there's a painting in this gallery which actually shows the donors of the painting. They're in a tiny position vis-a-vis the painting, but they're there. They're actually portraits are actually in the painting. In the other gallery, you see large paintings of perhaps one person or perhaps a family, and they become the center, really, of the universe. It's no longer, in a sense, the church, which is all-inclusive, is no longer the Virgin Mary, the Christ figure, or whatever. It is now really an issue of a man, of just an ordinary person, perhaps, a wealthy ordinary person who is now depicted. And it can also involve a famous general or perhaps, a famous admiral or whatever, a king, a queen. And this was something that you did find in the Renaissance, but it became increasingly more and more apparent as you move further away from the Renaissance. That collection actually is the earliest and probably the first collection of non-Western art that came to this museum. In 1956, Alfred Barton, who was a resident of Miami and one of the founders of this museum in 1950, approached the director and said, "I will donate to this museum my collection of Native American textiles." He collected specifically Navajo and Southwestern textiles. And before he made the gift in 1956, he decided that rather than make a gift of 200 textiles to the museum, he would split the collection, and he traded with the Denver Art Museum at the time for a number of other artifacts, which included beaded work, basketry, ceramics, and a group of other objects which the museum did not have and which he did not have in his own collection, in order to make the collection more diverse. And although those pieces are individually very, very fine examples, the collection is still best known for its Barton collection of southwestern native textiles, which is very interesting. Pieces in the African collection are several that are extremely special. We have costumes, for example. There's a very large textile collection. There's one that sits in the corner, which is at this point mounted in a fashion that it would not have necessarily been mounted on before. It has a flat board across the top of it. This board would have been worn on the head, and the dancer would literally have twirled around. It looked very much like a whirling dervish, in a sense, with all these flaps of color sort of spinning out. There was no mask on the top of the head. The whole vestment, in a sense, the whole costume itself was mask and costume together. The other pieces that are extremely interesting out there is a piece we just acquired from the Nok culture. And ceramics are little known in Africa, at least in most visitors to museums don't expect to find really high quality ceramics from the continent of Africa. And in fact, they were producing very, very fine ceramic sculpture, ceramic pots from a fairly early period of time, from at least the 3rd century BC that we know about. And the particular figure that I'm referring to as a Nok figure was probably may have been a portrait figure, we don't know. Its arms and its feet are missing, but it's fairly complete as those figures go. They tended to be fairly low fired, and so the breakage and damage from them is fairly frequent. The other piece, which is very interesting, and again an area that most Westerners may not realize that the Africans did practice in, was in bronze casting. They actually had a bronze casting system that they used, and there's a wonderful ring out there from the Yoruba culture depicting ritual decapitation. Most people may know about Benin bronzes. There are Benin bronze heads of Obas, who were chiefs, that were made as memorial portraits. And these were placed in the shrines, and numbers of them have been documented and collected. Actually, if you want to look at the museum from the point of view of medium, the most impressive medium that we have in terms of cross-cultural and perhaps more universal, if you want to use it that way, are the ceramic collection and the textile collection, which seem to cut across any number of continents and any number of cultures. The ceramic collection is extremely large. It includes material, for example, from China, which has a very early pottery making tradition, and we have a small show which shows the history of pottery from original coil-built pottery, where everyone did that as a child. You rolled out a roll of clay and then you coiled it until you made a pot, then you smoothed it with your hands to get it flat. And then from that, of course, you went into a wheel-turned pottery type and mold made in all different types of potteries. And then you also get into a whole history of decoration. First, probably would just be some kind of mineral paint, which is exemplified in a number of African pieces as well as on Native American pieces, and also very early Chinese pieces. Then you get ultimately into glazes, which you don't find really on Native American pottery or pre-Columbian or any of that. Well, actually, the Lowe is fairly technologically advanced for its age and its budget. We have a website on which everything is cataloged, actually, in terms of our exhibitions from the past. So we have an archive on that, and also our future exhibitions and programming is all on that website. And the website address is actually very simple. It's www.lowemuseum.org, with the Lowe Museum being one word. And so it's very readily available.
Join us next week as we continue our journey into the world of the arts.